Alright, and we are back after our little detour with the line weight and line quality lesson to draw things in perspective using technical drawing and freehand method. Now, before going on drawing full scenes, let's do one more prop drawing of a chair. But this time we will take our time and use all the tools of the technical drawing and the freehand method to finish this drawing up to completion. Let's start the first stage, the bounding box. I'm observing the line in between the chair legs to know where the perspective lines will be. As we go up, the lines get more flat lined since we are getting closer to the horizon line, and you can tell by the top of the cushion. I make sure all perspective lines are parallel to each other so I can get a good bounding box out of it. All done in freehand at this point since we don't need to go through every part of the technical drawing, we just need the final result of it. Now the bounding box is done, I can start adding the rough shape of the chair inside of the bounding box. I'm not using any curved line just yet, just making sure my distances are correct and the angles are aligned with the reference photo. One side of the chair back is done, now I can project it with parallel lines to the other side and connect the top to the right side there. The front side is done, let's connect the back side together to get the U shape of the back of the chair. Let's do the second part of the chair now and draw the legs connecting between the bottom of the back of the chair to the corners of the bounding box. I'm taking this much slower than before because I want a good quality drawing out of it. The more careful you are with these initial stages, the better your drawing will be and the less headache you will have afterward in the detailing part. Seems like I need more space for the front legs since it comes out a little bit more in comparison to the chair back edge. Once I have the legs and their thickness on the left side, I can project them as we did before to the other side and draw the legs on the right side. Before I draw the legs there, I want to see where the bottom cushion will be so I can make sure the leg will be in the right placement when I draw it. Still not using any smooth edges just yet, drawing the whole thing in straight lines which I will end up smoothing later on. It's just easier and faster to draw straight edge at this stage. I ended up forgetting the back leg, but I will draw it later in the detailing part. Let's delete all the lines that would be visible behind the cushion so we can see what we are dealing with so far. We need to draw the back cushion now, so let's project the front of it backward and draw it at the edge of the chair's backboard. From the edge I start drawing the curve of the back cushion, making sure it fits in the exact place I see in the reference photo. Now the second stage is done, the initial sketch of the chair is all done. Now it's time to smooth things up and add the first layer of details, so for that I lower the opacity and start adding the details on top. First thing to do is smoothing up the edges of the chair. Once I finish the top side, I do the same for the bottom and connect in between the two edges. Now to the back of the chair. We do the same for the corners there. After connecting the top to the bottom, we get the first smooth edge of the chair. Let's now do the same for the other side and connect in between them. I zoom in a bit to get a better handle of the drawing and rotate the canvas as I work to get a better position to draw the right curve in a clean, straight way, like we saw in the dynamic sketching in the previous lesson. The back of the chair is done. Let's now smooth out the bottom cushion. I'm also using some line weight already to make sure things look good right away instead of doing the work twice. So I'm adding more weight on the corners, creases, shadow areas and so on. Let's now smooth the legs. They are not 100% straight lines. They do have a slight curve on the edges here and there. Finally adding the smooth line for the back cushion and finishing up the first layer of details for the shell. Now moving on to the fourth stage and adding the final details, textures, line weight, and hash lines for the shell. Let's divide the areas of different materials in the back of the shell. I now realize that the back leg is missing, so I extend the lines from the current leg to make sure I draw it in the right position and in the right angle. Okay, let's go back to detailing now, adding thicker lines for the ambient occlusion areas and shadow edges. Add another layer of details on top. Let's zoom out and take a look at what we have so far. Okay, all seems good. Let's add some final details and move on to the values. Now, as I said, we will do a whole set of lessons on paintings later, but consider this as a preview for what will come later, after finishing up the perspective drawing. I select the area outside of the shell, invert the selection and add a dark gray value to the whole shell, and make sure I remove any negative space from the values. I add another layer on top and link it to the gray value layer and start adding the darker values on top, like the top part of the shell and the legs. I add lighter values next for the bottom part of the back of the cushions. Now I'm adding the minor details of value, like cast shadow, reflections, highlights, and so on. Adding now the smaller and smaller details like dark shadows in the corners and highlights on the glossy parts of the shell. Let's add some textures now with hatching in the top part of the shell on a new layer. and deleting any hash line that goes beyond that area. Here's the final stage now. It's time to remove all the lines we did so far. All the work we put to have the line art now has to be removed to turn this from a drawing to a painting. We do this by lowering the line art opacity first and adding values instead in its place. So now there are no more lines, just values. And the more values I add, the lower the opacity I give to the line art layer. The line art did its job so far, it got us here. Now it's time for the values to take over, which is the natural process of a painting. After values, of course, comes the color stage, which takes over from the values and finish up the whole painting. But we will do colors later. We will need to move on to the next example after all. But keep in mind that you don't need to do line weight if you are planning to do a full painting afterward. Line weight is a replacement for painting in a drawing. If you are planning to do a painting from the start, a thin continuous line art for the whole drawing is good enough to get you to the next stage. I'm doing it here just to show you the whole process and all its stages. Not that this will be your process when you draw your own objects. I just thought to add this as a note to not do line weight if you are planning to do a full painting from the start. And here are all the stages of drawing the share side by side. The initial bounding box, the rough sketch, the two levels of details, and the line art drawing. And finally, the end results values of the share. And as I said, after that comes the colors and special effects. In this lesson, you should focus on the first three stages and leave the values for later. But if you want to give it a try, go for it. But it's not necessary for this lesson. Alright, let's now move on from props to a whole scene. Starting with an easy example, a still life set. We have a simple still life here with few cups and pots and a little fabric underneath it. Now why would this be harder than a prop? A prop is a single item without background or any scenery around. So now we are moving up to drawing a whole scene. Starting easy of course, before going up the difficulty as always. So let's first try to figure out where is the horizon line, what type of perspective is this, and where are the vanishing points. We can of course just draw it freehand by now, but let's do some technical analysis first so you can follow along. We have simple shapes here with some details like cylinders, ellipses, and so on. So from the ellipses opening in the cups and the slight curve in the top ellipse of the kettle, we can tell that the horizon line is somewhere in the middle in between the two ellipses, where curves flips upward in the kettle and downward in the cups. What about the vanishing point? Looking at the scene, it seems like all of the items are coming from the same point. There are no obvious straight lines here to tell where the vanishing point is, but it does look like a one-point perspective. Also, the angle of the ellipses makes it a bit harder to get the axis from that would lead to a vanishing point. So usually with the still life, the vanishing point would be in the center since the camera or the viewer will be there, unless it was of course cropped from a larger viewpoint, but that's a whole different topic of discussion. So just to make our lives a bit easier, I'm gonna start it with placing the vanishing point right in the center of the drawing. So let's start replicating the perspective on our canvas. I also start drawing the lines for the table because it will be our ground in this still life. Now we can start building up the bounding boxes on the new ground and connecting it to the vanishing point. Let's draw the first one for the cup on the right. The depth is not that big since the whole table takes less than 20% of the whole canvas, so everything has to sit on that area. Once I have the bounding box, I freehand draw the top ellipse and make sure it mimics the same opening I see in the reference photo. For the bottom it's much smaller, so let's find the center first with diagonals and draw the smaller ellipse down there. Let's draw another ellipse in the bottom part of the cup to show where the cup starts getting narrower in the bottom, basically where the form starts to change. Now all I have to do is connect in between these ellipses to get the final shape of the cup. We now have the main shape of the cup. We will add the handle later. Let's now move on to the larger kettle and the background. We start with the bounding box again, making sure I notice where it starts and what is the relation to the other items in the scene. The bottom of the kettle will have a curved up ellipse, while the top is slightly curved down, because the kettle goes all the way through from the bottom of the horizon line to the top. To make things more symmetrical, I use the central axis to make sure I don't go way over the limit from one side than the other. To add more details to the kettle, I need more details on the cups as well, to know how far is the kettle goes behind the cup. Now I move on to drawing the main frame for the kettle and the cup. Now moving on to the bowl by first drawing the bounding box. I add the segment of the middle of the bowl, which is the widest part of it. From there we can add the axis and the top, bottom and middle ellipse so that we can connect in between to get the final shape. Let's delete all the hidden lines and see what we got so far. The cup needs to be a bit bigger and a bit more toward the left. Let's add the final part, which is the fabric. Now there are no construction lines for this one. It's an organic shape. We didn't get into the organic shapes just yet, but here we are going full freehand drawing, using angles and measurements, negative space, and all the other tools of freehand drawing. We also measure how much certain parts are in comparison to other items in the scene. This will make sure that we don't go overboard with the overall scale of the objects. And the initial sketch is finally done. We can now lower the opacity and add the second layer of details on top like handles, kettle top lip, and so on. Let's start with the kettle upper lip and the handle. I draw the handle as a basic bounding tube first, and then draw the handle inside of it afterwards. I copy the curve so I can get a parallel curved line. I add the cup handle next. Then I add the ball details and rings. Finally, I modify the fabric shape and add the folds and creases on top. Let's move up again and add a third layer of details on top, adding textures, groups, shadow lines, and grunge marks all around. Now we are basically done. All we need now is to draw the final scene using straight, clean, dark lines. I zoom in a bit to get the handle of the details a bit better. Here is where dynamic sketching pays off, with straight and clean lines. Still being mindful not only of the line quality, but the line weight as well, adding lighter interior lines and harder exterior ones. Also making sure all the factors we talked about in line weight are respected here. The first layer of line weight is done. Let's add another layer now with thicker lines and adjust some of the lighter lines as well. Adding some values here and there. We don't need the background sketch anymore, so let's hide it and add some values. Again, this isn't a necessary step, but let's make it look good since we got here anyway. I'm adding the dark values first since the painting is in a low light or low key, and then I'm adding the lighter values next. Adding even darker shadows afterward, and then lighter values. Finally adding the fine details at the end with the highlights and dark corners. I use levels to get more contrast out of the values a little bit. We can keep moving and removing the lines afterward, but we still have much more examples to do, so let's move on to the big scene. An interior living room. Now we are going big. A whole room with items, props, floors, ceilings, and the rest of it. But this shouldn't be harder than anything else we already did. Follow the same steps we did with the still life and you will be fine. So first of all, let's find the horizon line. To do so, I just extend the lines of the ceiling, the lines of the furniture, and the lines of the floor, and find out the vanishing point at the meeting point of all these lines. From that point, we can draw a horizontal line to represent the horizon line. So this is a one-point perspective as we can see here. To copy this point to my canvas, I need to know where it is in comparison to the center of my canvas. So I draw diagonal lines on both the reference and my canvas and see how close the center of the diagonals to the vanishing point is. It's almost in the center of this shot. Once I have the horizon line and the vanishing point, I can now start drawing the room. I start first with the lines from the ceiling and the floor just to know where my walls are. Even if I can't see them, like on the left, I guesstimate where they would be and draw the lines there. Now the lines shouldn't go all the way to the center, so let's draw the horizontal lines now for the back wall. I draw a horizontal line for the top edge of the wall, and from there I can draw all around the edge of the ceilings and the floor to get the back wall. Now we have the room walls and the floor done. Let's fill up the room with some furniture. Remember, this is the initial sketch, so no details just yet. So I draw the bounding box for the sofa on the left, measuring the width of it and the height, and connecting this rectangle of the bounding box back to the vanishing point. Before it reaches the back wall, I cut it off and close up the bounding box. And we got the sofa's bounding box done. From the edges of the sofa, I can now draw the carpet, which aligns with the depth of the sofa's bounding box. So I draw the plane of the carpet to the other side of the room and measure the area between the carpet and the wall and stop before I reach the wall as I see it in the reference. I draw it back to the vanishing point and add the other edge at the limit of the sofa from the other side. I move from one place to another just to get the big items first before going smaller to the details and the accessories. So let's draw the painting on the left wall. It's a bit higher than the sofa and lower than the ceiling, so let's add the bounding box there. There are too many lines already, and I keep cleaning the lines up every time I finish a bounding box, before they get too busy. That's why I add new objects on new layers, so I don't have to delete the ones underneath it. Let's also delete the wall's extended lines to make it a bit cleaner. Okay, now the cabinet bounding box also align with the carpet and the sofa, so let's draw it in between the carpet and the wall and draw the height as we see it in the reference photo, and then extend it toward the vanishing point. You can see how easy the process is now. Everything we do is extended toward that one point, and once you draw one item, you can reference the rest of the items back to it and back to each other. Once you get the main room done, the rest is just fun to do, so take your time and enjoy the process. Let's draw the lines at the back, which is basically a small cylinder with a cone on top. The shape bounding box here is a bit different. It's not aligned with the rest of the room. It's a bit rotated. As we learned from rotation and perspective, the bounding box doesn't go toward the same vanishing point. So the points will rotate along the item, making it a multi-point perspective. But just for this chair, I'll just freehand it here. This will have to do for now. I also draw a little table in the back. Let's adjust the shape bounding box a bit. For the center table, I draw the whole thing in one organic shape and extrude the top to the ground. The back wall has a little cabinet at the bottom, so let's draw it a little above the chair and add a tiny edge for it, since it's close to the horizon line, and it will look like a thin straight line. Next, I draw the niche in the wall, where the windows will be as a rectangle since this is one point perspective, and then extrude it toward the vanishing point. I draw the columns and extrude the trim molding decoration in the ceiling, like we did with the loft and sweep exercises. This will have one shape that rotates around the room, so I move it around and back toward the left wall by extruding the lines toward the vanishing point. Now I do the same for the other side and delete the extra lines. Then I draw the frame for the windows and the metal bars in the middle. I draw the diagonal lines just to see where the center of the windows is and divide the whole area to 3 frames as we see it in the reference photo. From there I draw the frame with all the major details there. Let's add the table next to the sofa in the foreground. Now I want to draw the grooves in the parquet floor. To do this, I counted how many slabs of wood are there in the original photo, divided the bottom of the image to the same amount of segments, and connected back to the vanishing point. Of course, all of this is on a new layer, so I don't destroy the sketch I made underneath it. Next, I delete all the extra lines I don't need, like under the furniture and the carpet, and I end up with the segments for the parquet floor. I add the details for the windows with the small segments as well. There is a bridge in the ceiling connecting the left and the right side of the room with the molding moving with it. I connect the line all the way to the other wall and see where it is in comparison to the painting, and then draw the bottom of it to the other side between the two moldings. From there I draw the height of it to the other side. I missed the painting on the right wall, so let's draw its depth first and connect the perspective lines for the top and bottom limits. Let's add some thickness to both paintings on both sides. And with that, the first draft is all done. This is the initial rough sketch of the whole room. Once you reach this level, you are basically 90% done. All you have left is the details, which is the fun part of drawing, to be honest. So let's add a new layer and start adding the details of the room. I start detailing the furniture now inside of the bounding boxes we drew. The cabinet on the right is just a box with 4 legs, so let's draw it. The legs are a thin pyramid with a hole inside, shaped like the letter A. I can follow the perspective lines back to the vanishing point and draw the details accordingly. I can also freehand some of the details using the technical initial sketch. From one leg I can move on to the others and align them toward the first one. For the panels I use diagonals to divide the side to 2 parts, and then once more to 4 equal panels. For the accessories on top, like the box, it's basically drawing boxes in different orientations. For the vase I can freehand it using the same perspective lines. And this is the cabinet all done. I scaled it a bit to fit inside of the bounding box while keeping the same perspective angle. Let's draw the little boxes in the painting. They do look like boxes, but they are 2D inside of a 3D drawing. Let's add some details to the table and the carpet. Very simple curved legs on top with some boxes and another vase as accessories. Onto the other table, which is a simple cone shape. For the sofa, we have to fit the details inside of the bounding box we did while adding the cushions, legs, back, and so on. I draw the whole sofa first and then divide it into three equal parts with pillows and cushions on top. I keep comparing the lines with the rest of the furniture to make sure things don't go too big or too small. Now on to the painting. Moving on to the hanging lights. Now I'm adding a third layer of details which are accessories in the back, like flower pots. I forgot to draw the shell in the previous layer, so let's add it now. I'm now freehanding the rest of the drawing, since we basically have all the info we need to measure things to each other. I divide the back wall for equal panels by drawing one and then repeating it around. Let's add more details to the windows. Now let's add some detail to the ceiling. Finally adding some final touches to the walls. Now we can zoom in a bit to finish up the painting with final line quality and line weight, focusing on the center area as a focal point. Let's lower the opacity of the previous layer just to see our lines a bit more clearer on top. Adding textures and folds to the interior details with lighter lines while adding thicker lines for the outline and exterior edges. Moving on to the painting and the ceiling. Adding lighter details on the back wall since it's the furthest away from us. Onto the right cabinet. Finally, let's add some details to the chair in the back. Okay, the first layer of detail is done. Let's hide the initial sketch and add a second layer of details on top. Here I'm adding thicker lines to different parts and cast shadows. More textures, more interior details. Now I add the lighter edges. And this is it, all done. It's up to you if you want to add values next, but you can add a layer of gray values underneath it and start detailing light and shadows accordingly. Again, not necessary for this lesson, but you can have some fun after all the drawing we did. So enjoy the process and have some fun. And here's the final interior scene, all done in perspective. For the final example for this lesson, let's go bigger and draw a full house. We went from boxes to advanced shapes to complicated objects to props to interior rooms, and finally we are now drawing a whole house. This house seems to have very interesting shapes, so let's try to find the horizon line and figure out what type of perspective is it. To find the perspective, I trace the lines of the house from both the top and the bottom and from both sides, left and right. Since we don't have horizontal lines, this means it's a 2-point perspective. So we need to find the 2 points. From the top and the bottom from the right side, we meet at a distant point. I add few more lines just to be sure this is the right place for the first vanishing point. From the other side, the point is almost at the edge of the left side of the picture. We connect in between the 2 points to find the horizon line. Since the right point is so far away, I will try to guesstimate the placement of both points and try to hit it at least once and connect the rest of the lines toward the same point. So with the horizon line drawn, let's start drawing the initial sketch of the house. You can start from any point you want. From the first vertical line, I try to hit that faraway point while observing the angle of the reference image. I do the same for the top side and get the first elevation of the house. Now to do the same to the left side, knowing that the vanishing point on the left is just outside the image border. We have the first block, now we can compare the rest of the lines toward these lines. So let's start moving around and drawing the rest of the house. I'm not bothered by any details now, just drawing the major blocks of the house. For the roof of the house, we find the midpoint of the bottom line and draw the tip of the pyramid there. From there we extrude the whole face backward to get the back side of the house. As you can see, I'm treating parts of this house as blocks, like the columns on the left or the right. They are all included in the same bounding box. We have lots of time later to add the details. Now that we have the initial sketch done, let's start adding some larger details like the border of the columns or the middle part of the house. As always, take your time here. The more careful you are in this initial stage, the easier the detailing part will be. Okay, let's clean up some of the lines since things are getting a little bit busy. So let's keep the main outline we made and remove all the perspective lines. We can also use different layers to make things easier, but it's okay for now. Now I'm adding the second block of columns in the middle by drawing the bounding box first and adding the interior segmentation afterward. Let's add some details for the garage and the borders of the windows. Okay, time for the second layer of details, starting with the windows. We have the top and the bottom borders of the windows, so we only need to segment the windows as we see them in the reference photos, and then extrude them inward a little bit. We do the same for the bottom windows and door. All the lines have to follow the perspective, otherwise things will look wrong and a bit distorted. Adding more details to the garage door, which is pushed inward a bit. The roof edge continues outside of the wall's limit a little bit, so let's add that and the details on the side of the house. Next, I'm adding the columns on the left with some details for the walkway around the house. Finally, we have the background with some trees in the back and grass in the front. Since we are not seeing any tree trunks here, just the leaves and the branches, there are no perspective lines here. So we just make sure the sizes are correct. We can always draw the details later. Okay, the initial sketch is complete. Let's add the final outline on a new layer. Cleaning up the lines and adding some line weight. When things get confusing, lower the opacity of the initial layer or hide it altogether. Adding any details I missed in the previous layer and fixing up some issues here and there. It's coming out nicely. Let's add another layer of details on top with thicker lines and more line weight to emphasize the perspective. adding the final layer of details like textures, form lines, and the background trees. This is basically done. This is all done in perspective using both technical drawing and freehand. But let's finish it up like the other examples and do some value painting. I add the light values first, since this is a high key painting, which means there are more light values than the dark ones. Moving around the house and adding details here and there. We will talk about all painting aspects in a different lesson as I mentioned, but give it a go and see how your value painting will look like. Just keep observing the initial reference and add values as you see them. If you want to make it easier, you can always desaturate the reference photo to black and white just to make it easier to see values without the distracting colors on top. With some work on it later, this is the final painting of the house that we started with simple bounding boxes. The examples we drew in this lesson are the main reason we studied boxes for so long. Details are much easier to draw when the base sketch is all done. Everything you see in life is made of simple shapes. Knowing how to segment what you see and how to convert these segments into basic shapes is 80% of the drawing. The rest 20% is simply adding the tiny details around and painting them off. The initial sketch is where the whole craftsmanship is. Learning perspective and how to draw in a 3D world and making your 2D drawings convey a 3D illusion is a long and hard process. You have to practice a lot, starting like we did from easy boxes to houses, vehicles, animals, and even figure drawing. When you feel stuck or your drawings aren't looking as good as you want it to be, go back to the lesson you feel you did well in and practice it a bit more. Don't move up the difficulty level till you are 100% sure you understood the lesson and practiced enough examples on it. Only then you can move another step up the perspective drawing mountain. So pick a few examples for this lesson, ranging from a simple furniture, to still life, to interior scenes, to full houses, and practice all what you learned about perspective in the previous 30 or so lessons. This is basically it for this lesson, and for the first chapter of Perspective Drawing for Beginners. This was the introduction of perspective for beginners. We of course still have 2 huge chapters on perspective ahead for more advanced perspective drawing, but as for the first chapter, we are all done for now. The only thing left is to go over some of the most common mistakes beginners do while drawing in perspective. Some of these mistakes will look familiar to you, or you may have done them before yourself. We have been learning about when things go right in perspective, so let's discuss in the next lesson when things go wrong in perspective. This way we can learn how to fix things when they don't work out as well as we want them to be. Then after that, we will finish up the first chapter with some exercises. Lots and lots of them. Almost 5 or 6 videos worth on exercises alone for the whole chapter, coming after the next video. Then we will really be done with chapter 1. As always, if you like this lesson, feel free to leave a like. If you have any questions, leave them down in the comments section and I will do my best to answer them as soon as possible. To stay notified for future lessons, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next lesson.